This is Nathaniel Cogley.
And this is Eric Morrow. Welcome to this edition of Cogley and Morrow on Politics. Things are heating up, so it's time to be listening to us each week right here on KTRL FM 90.5, as well as on SoundCloud and on wherever you download your podcast, because you want to keep up. You don't want to miss out. You want some good analysis with civility and depth each week, and that's what we bring to you right here on Cogley and Morrow on Politics.
Eric, I think our cover is blown. So the Nevada caucuses, if you stayed up late on Saturday night, you might see how those went. We are recording before we have that information. We have kids. We are not recording Sunday at noon. Right. We record a little ahead of time. So even as of recording time, we don't know how those Nevada caucuses play out. They're certainly interesting, certainly something we'll incorporate next week. But this first segment, we're going to focus on that big Democratic debate on Wednesday. This was the record-setting, most-watched Democratic primary presidential debate in U.S. history, and that was largely because Michael Bloomberg finally made the stage. As you mentioned last week, they changed the rules. No longer was there a unique donor threshold. It was all about poll results or having some delegates. Bloomberg qualified from some national poll results, and he finally made the debate stage. And I'll tell you, Eric, he walked into a Shark Tank there. They were coming at him pretty hard.
They were, and now people are questioning his advisors to say, okay, You're not even on the ballot in Nevada. Why would you even get on stage?
He maybe had a way out to say, well, that's the debate for Nevada. I'm not focused on Nevada. I'll join later.
Right. And
bought himself some time. But I do admire that he was, hey, if you guys invite me, I'll come. That's kind of the character and the spirit we would want. Mm-hmm. Also, there's some of these issues that maybe aren't good issues, but how will we expect this to go? How are you going to handle this on stage when 5 people are attacking you? And of course, they're all attacking each other. We have some clips. Let's play some clips. Get your thoughts on some of these clips. So this one was widely cited in the press. This is Elizabeth Warren right at the intro. And she's going to make a really strong attack here. Clip 1, AJ.
I'd like to talk about who we're running against. A billionaire who calls women fat broads and horse-faced lesbians. And no, I'm not talking about Donald Trump. I'm talking about Mayor Bloomberg. Democrats are not going to win if we have a nominee who has a history of hiding his tax returns, of harassing women, and of supporting racist policies like redlining and stop and frisk. Look, I'll support whoever the Democratic nominee is, but understand this. Democrats take a huge risk if we just substitute one arrogant billionaire for another.
So here's the irony, before I get your thoughts on this. When she gave her post-New Hampshire speech, she talked about how factions are forming in the party. This is unfortunate. If you're trying to be the last man standing, you could tear the party down, but we need to unite here. And boy, as soon as Bloomberg comes on the stage, she was as negative and aggressive as she could be, and to some degree effective. Eric, what do you think?
I think she was effective in the debate, at least in terms of the attack. In terms of effectiveness for her own campaign, I think that's still to be questioned.
Sure.
Because if we think back, and we've pointed this out several times, that really her drop, at least in national polls, began when she went after Bernie Sanders. And so now we see the same thing with Bloomberg. I don't know if she's trying to help herself or if she's actually trying to help Sanders, which seemed to be the theme of the night, whether they were thinking and doing it directly or not. But this was very orchestrated. It was very clearly coming out from the very beginning. What I questioned when I was listening to it as well is how prepared Michael Bloomberg was. I mean, was there any inclination at all that he would be the focus of attack across from all the other candidates during the debate? And this just set it off, and it really set the tone for most of the debate.
Yeah, I think he certainly knew these attacks were coming. I think he handled himself okay. I didn't give him an F, the C here, but what we hear from Warren there, this is her strength, and I've been thinking about this field and how no one brings the total package, but each of them brings something. And this is what Warren's consistently been good at. She's the best studied, the best prepared. She's a professor. She comes in ready. She's read the background. She knows what she's saying. She can cite things. And she was prepared for this debate, and she was prepared to go on offense against Bloomberg.
She was, and she was arguing almost like you would argue in a courtroom for your side, because what question I had was, especially on the part where she identified the non-disclosure agreements later on.
That's coming up. That's
okay,
right
yeah, and that to me, it was not so much that was politics. There was not as much about fact and how these things actually work. It was an opportunity to attack Bloomberg and see how he would respond.
Well, you segued us perfectly into clip 2.
The mayor has to stand on his record, and what we need to know is exactly what's lurking out there. He has gotten some number of women, dozens, who knows, to sign non-disclosure agreements, both for sexual harassment and for gender discrimination in the workplace. So, Mr. Mayor, are you willing to release all of those women from those non-disclosure agreements so we can hear their side of the story?
We have a very few non-disclosure agreements.
How many is
Let me
that?
finish.
How many is that?
None of them accuse me of doing anything other than maybe they didn't like the joke I told. And let me put, there's agreements between two parties that wanted to keep it quiet, and that's up to them. They signed those agreements, and we'll live with it.
So,
All right, Eric. What do you think when you hear this exchange? You're right. I don't know if there's this deep substantive thing there, but I don't know that he handled it as good as he could.
He didn't. And what should have been said, or what he should have been prepared to say, was that often with these non-disclosure agreements, those are wanted by the other parties as well. They don't want their name out there. They don't want their name out in the media. This is very, very political on the part of Warren, because she knows that.
And with future companies they might work for.
Right. Yeah, it could cause injury and damage in other ways.
In the business world.
They may not want people to know how much they received in a settlement. Yeah. So there's a very good explanation. Bloomberg didn't give it. Warren was probably hoping that he would not, that he would be caught off guard on this one issue. But Warren would know that. Warren would know that non-disclosure agreements, there's a lot of complexity, and there's different sides to the story in terms of how they end up and what the different parties want. But this was a very clear political play by Warren to try to catch Bloomberg off guard, knowing that she's playing to an audience, especially a studio audience, where you're going to get that response, because she's casting it in this atmosphere of that has impacted the Me Too movement and many other things, knowing that you're going to get a response out of that. And that's going to play well on TV. It's going to play well to people who really don't know what non-disclosure agreements are about.
Yeah, and I think Bloomberg was ready for some criticism about maybe some comments he had made in the past. I think he's the first to admit that the times have changed. He's changed with it. So maybe he admits he made some inappropriate jokes in the past, and he wouldn't do that anymore. But you're right. I think there's three audiences. There's one in the theater. They're Democratic activists who have been involved in this campaign for a long time and have favorites on stage there. And then there's the Democrats or the audience that's actually going to watch that debate, the whole thing. And then there's the casual voter who just might see some clips or headlines out of this thing, not actually watch the debate, So this played really well with that audience, but it threw Bloomberg off, because a businessman is not going to be pressured to release a non-disclosure agreement live on stage in a debate. It seems like for him, it seems like almost an inappropriate request. Aren't we supposed to debate policy for the presidency here?
Sure. Well, and you notice Biden tried to jump in the end.
Yeah.
And he's had his own. He's had his own challenges and issues as well. And I think part of that was maybe the motivation to make sure that didn't get deflected back on him in some way, because now you look at this, you've got Biden not that we haven't seen Warren go after him. She doesn't need to at this point.
Not right now, yeah.
But Sanders, Sanders comments that he has made now. Now Bloomberg. This does play well among that activist group within the party, and I think she was trying to maximize the impact of that.
It really shows what a threat to the nomination the rest of the group feels he is, because this is headed into the Nevada caucus and then the South Carolina primary. He's not even competing in those. Right. And yet he was the source of attack, or he was the focus of their attacks when he wasn't even competing in the next two states. The person who rises to the top is the threat that people try to bring down. And the fact that it was focused on him, not necessarily Bernie Sanders, who's sitting there getting the most votes and looking set up for the next couple states, that's very interesting that they felt like he was such a threat. And they're like, we're very anxious to get him on stage and have him in that moment and make him on the defensive.
Right. Ron Brownstein in The Atlantic wrote a great article about this week. In fact, he's had several that have just been right on target the last few weeks. And the focus was on how they went after the wrong person. That all the other candidates had so much of a focus on Bloomberg now that he was a part of the group on stage, really because of his political past, becomes a target for the ideas and the views of certain of the candidates. But now that he's there, now that they can go after him, and really the impact is that it shielded Sanders. Even though he had some very direct questions were asked of him, it wasn't too long with his answers that direction was shifted away from him and to the other candidates.
Yeah, and Warren is basically making the case, you made this mistake, so you should never be president. And Bloomberg saying, look at the totality of what I've done in my life. Look at the totality of what I bring to the table. So Warren did land some blows on Bloomberg. I don't think they're knockouts, but everyone kind of says he's kind of, landed some blows. They weren't knockout blows. I do, however, think Bloomberg handled Sanders much better. In fact, the person on the stage that engaged with Sanders most effectively was Bloomberg. And I think that's kind of lost in some of the media. So we have a clip here about Sanders questioning whether or not billionaires should even exist. And we see this back and forth between Bloomberg. Clip 3, AJ.
Senator Sanders, what did you mean that you don't think they should exist?
Tell you what I mean.
What did that mean?
We have a grotesque and immoral distribution of wealth and income. Mike Bloomberg owns more wealth than the bottom 125 million Americans. That's wrong. That's immoral. That should not be the case when we got 500,000 people sleeping out on the streets, when we have kids who cannot afford to go to college, when we have 45 million people dealing with student debt. We have enormous problems facing this country, and we cannot continue seeing a situation where in the last 3 years, billionaires in this country saw an $850 billion increase in their wealth. Congratulations, Mr. Bloomberg. But the average American last year saw less than a 1% increase in his or her income. That's wrong.
Mayor Bloomberg, should you exist?
I can't speak for all billionaires. All I know is I've been very lucky, made a lot of money, and I'm giving it all away to make this country better. And a good chunk of it goes to the Democratic Party as well.
Is it too much? Have you earned too much money? Has it been an obscene amount of... Should you have earned that much money?
Yes. I worked very hard for it, and I'm giving it away.
All right. Thank you.
All right, Eric. So we see Bernie Sanders' attacks on Bloomberg were less of, you have this mistake or unfortunate thing that you did that I'm going to take you down with. It's more of this big structural economic class warfare, something a socialist might go after, the whole concept of someone like Bloomberg with billions of dollars attacking the whole concept of how much wealth he has versus average people. What do you take when you hear that exchange there?
Well, I think it directed listeners to then look at Bloomberg and wait for his answers and not really to analyze what Sanders was actually saying. Because if you analyze what he's saying, no matter where you are on the political spectrum, if you understand the history of our country and the links of a representative democracy with an economic system that's based on capitalism, some of the things that he's saying are very dangerous. Because then you're saying, okay, well, if there are limits, or if there is a way of looking at and capping wealth and then wealth redistribution, who's responsible for that? And this even goes back to some of the things we could look at in terms of the founders in looking at limited government and limiting the power of government in order to maximize freedom, because all of a sudden now you're kind of swinging that to say, well, no, we need to expand the control and authority of government in terms of economic freedom, even more so than we've already done it over the course of history, implementing income tax and having social programs where money is collected and redistributed in certain ways. We've struggled always with a balance to do that. What we're talking about here is a massive structural change when he starts using that kind of language. It implies it. It doesn't mean that Sanders as president would be able to accomplish something like that. And I think it would be maybe as contentious of a presidency as we see in some aspects of Donald Trump's presidency if he was attempting to do that. But I think the analysis was lost on Bloomberg. It was him having to defend the fact that he's been very successful. He's a self-made billionaire.
Right.
He has made. You could look at his wealth. We're not talking about the illegality here, that he acquired it in some way that's not been a part of the economic system that we have in this country. But all of that Sanders rhetoric was all pointing to that, to try to cast him as the robber baron, someone that has gotten all of this at the expense of others, while there's 125 million people out there that are suffering because of him.
Yeah, you can make $1 billion different ways, through corruption, or you can make $1 billion by being someone who's very valuable, who actually combines land, labor, and capital in a very innovative way that creates value. And I think that's the one critique I'd have on that answer. He said, did you deserve to make all that money? He said, yes, I worked very hard. It should have been, yes, I created a lot of value, because your average working man like me, I work hard too. I'm just not creating the level of value he's creating, which would justify his enormous wealth.
Right. And think of all the people that benefit from what he's done. That's the nature of a capitalistic system, where there aren't limits on that, because as the idea here is that if someone's successful in that way, they have to employ people to be able to be successful.
Yeah. Do we want to lose our billionaires? Are they really what's wrong with America?
No,
we want them to go abroad and create companies and investments abroad, that's a concern.
I think that is a concern, and it's a concern that really challenges some very, like you said, broad structural issues here, that if most people started to think about this seriously, they should be raising some concerns as well, because what does that imply in terms of actual policy, or not so much in policy outcomes, but where government would be directed and what kind of challenges and tension and conflict that would create.
Yeah, what are the unintended consequences of driving our billionaires away and discourage their continued involvement in the economy? So this continued on, and he started talking about workers, and this is where Bloomberg says, you're going down a road you shouldn't go down here. AJ, clip 4.
You know what, Mr. Bloomberg, wasn't you who made all that money. Maybe your workers played some role in that as well. And it is important that those workers are able to share the benefits also. When we have so many people who go to work every day and they feel not good about their jobs, they feel like cogs in a machine. I want workers to be able to sit on corporate boards as well, so they can have some say over what happens to their lives.
Mayor Bloomberg, you own a large company. Would you support what Senator Sanders is proposing?
Absolutely not. I can't think of ways that would make it easier for Donald Trump to get reelected than listening to this conversation. This is ridiculous. We're not going to throw out capitalism. We tried that. Other countries tried that. It was called communism, and it just didn't work.
We hear a number of things there. Sanders almost implying that Bloomberg's been exploiting these workers and making money off the workers. Of course, they've all probably got paychecks and healthcare plans. They probably have been compensated as part of the success of Bloomberg's financial empire that he's put together. And also suggesting workers should be on the corporate boards. Workers should run these companies. You know, the owners basically lose ownership once they have employees. What do you say, Eric?
Well, again, some dangerous rhetoric if you start to analyze that for what it is, knowing the challenges of running these corporations, the kind of talent that they try to attract, the investment. You know, part of the engagement in running companies is the level of investment that someone has in that company. But I would say from Bloomberg, I mean, and this was experienced too, working in New York City during the time that he was mayor, was that he brought a lot of the success from his business into the management of city government, and part of that was being able to attract people that have talent, that have ability, and to compensate them for that. And so I think Sanders is really off the mark here. I think he's trying to set something up structurally that is focused much more on equality. You know, that there has to be some level of evenness in all of this across the board. When and we look at it more in terms of equity, that we're not trying to not everybody have the same, but in our system is very much built on skills and abilities and how much those are valued in terms of the success of a company or an organization. And I think that again, to me, is very dangerous rhetoric. And I'm not saying that to say that we don't have challenges and issues, and we have used government in the history of our country to address the challenges of corruption and exploitation, and we're going to continue to have to do that. When you're in a free market system and you give as broad of economic freedom as possible, or as we can agree on, you're going to have abuses, and those abuses then are the responsibility certainly to find those and try to address those. But the way that Sanders is casting all of this, it's just it seems very contrary to the way that we have merged our economic system with government, and to me is very dangerous.
Well, and it's an attack line coming straight out of some classic Karl Marx books about, you know, workers unite, workers owning these things. And you heard Bloomberg there say, you know, one, this is ridiculous. You're using this language, you're going to reelect Trump easily. And they said, we've tried this before. It was communism. It didn't work. That got an ooh, oh, ah from Bernie and his supporters. They call themselves socialist, not communist. Right. What do you hear when you hear the fine line between those words?
Well, I think, again, it's rhetoric flying. I think most people, the average person, the challenge in them actually defining what that is, even knowing that we have some socialistic elements within our system of governance and economic system, but they're limited in terms of what Sanders is talking about. And I think Bloomberg was coming back with, and it's almost like this thing of, why are we even discussing this? I mean, why is this even a point of debate? Because he knows the economic numbers. He knows the economy's favoring Trump right now. As long as it stays stable and growing, it's going to continue to do that. And the stronger it is going into the election, the more of a threat that Sanders will appear to that. And so I think he's trying to warn everyone in a way of saying, why are we even discussing this? He recognizes the value of the system that we have and the critical election that this is, and really the danger. And I think that all the numbers, the things that we've looked at, some of the economic forecasts and so on, I don't see how, in defense of Bloomberg here, I don't see how that Sanders has a pathway forward in actually winning the presidency beyond the primary, when all of the things that he's railing about, the level of satisfaction among the majority of people, the stability of the economy, I just don't see where that gives him a chance.
Yeah, and Bloomberg is hearing this socialist ideological rhetoric and going, my God, are you guys trying to beat Trump or what? I mean, this is not what's going to beat Trump. And of course, everything's step by step. They're not trying to beat Trump yet. They're trying to be the nominee first until you get to that point. So attacks on Bloomberg weren't the only one. There was a lot of criticism from all 6 of them were going after each other to some degree. I picked out another clip. There were a lot to choose from, and I couldn't choose them all. Right. But this was one where Buttigieg and Klobuchar, 2 campaigns that you have to take seriously at this point. I mean, Buttigieg coming from mayor of South Bend up into performing very well in Iowa and New Hampshire. Klobuchar surviving to this point and then outperforming expectations both in Iowa and then New Hampshire. They're both kind of competing for that space, the space of the establishment moderate wing. When Biden falls apart, they're there to try to take that space, and they're competing for that space. And what we're going to hear earlier in the week, Amy Klobuchar in an interview didn't know the name of the Mexican president off the top of her head. I would say that's actually kind of hard because they have a 1-term limit in Mexico, so it's always changing, you know. But Buttigieg came at her with that right on the stage, and this is clip 5, AJ.
But you're staking your candidacy on your Washington experience. You're on the committee that oversees border security. You're on the committee that does trade. You're literally in part of the committee that's overseeing these things. And we're not able to speak to literally the first thing about the politics of the country to ourselves.
Are you trying to say that I'm dumb, or are you mocking me here, Pete?
This is a race for president. If winning a race for Senate in Minnesota translated directly to becoming president, I would have grown up under the presidency of Walter Mondale. This is different.
All right. So young Pete Buttigieg in his 30s suggesting Senator Klobuchar in her 50s, maybe doesn't have the knowledge or the resume to be president. He is the one with the great judgment, and there she's a senator from Minnesota, and here he was kind of mocking the idea of a senator from Minnesota. What do you hear when you hear Buttigieg and Klobuchar? I don't think things are headed in a great direction for Buttigieg here.
Well, I think it may be on the surface a cover for his lack of experience. We talked about this would be when if and when he receives any attention. If he was even to get close to winning the nomination, I mean, the focus would really be on his lack of experience beyond local and regional politics. And so I think this was an opportunity that he took to say, well, you're already in a position where you should know these things. Now, we've seen presidential candidates trip up on these kind of things before. I mean, everybody thinks back to George Bush and the question about a leader in Africa and how that played out on Saturday Night Live, where Will Ferrell starts naming the cabinet of some country in the middle of Africa.
And there's a great clip of Obama saying, "I've been to all 57 states."
Yes, yeah. So I think it was played out. It was made to be more than it really was, in that here was something that a direct question. It was probably meant to be that way because we've seen this happen before, and Buttigieg went after it because of his a lack of experience, and since this was the tone of the debate, okay, let's just start attacking each other. Then here was an opportunity for him to bring that into question, and she was, I think, caught off guard a little bit from it, but she did come back and try to address some of those things. So in terms of consequences, I just don't see that is so significant at this point, and why that becomes such a focal point. And again, you think about it being the debate so much about the barbs, the one-liners, the things that get the audience response. It's not about substance. It's not about going deep in terms of policy and looking at those things critically in terms of what the country either needs or needs to be sustained.
Well, it is dangers for the Buttigieg campaign. He's gotten so far. He's the best debater on that stage. He's so clever and witty. But, at some point, now that this is going to move very fast, I don't know that he'll be able to keep up, and the idea that he's the one based on his level of experience and, he's clearly annoying Klobuchar here. She feels like she's a very accomplished individual. She was a prosecutor in Minnesota, has been a 3-term senator. She's won her elections very easy. She's very familiar in D.C. She's a pretty loyal Democrat in the Senate. And he got into like criticizing her voting record in the Senate. And she's like, who are you? You know, who do you think you are? You're so presumptuous. You know, you think you're the perfect person, you know, in your 30s from mayor of South Bend, you know, and Buttigieg, who's done an amazing campaign. I certainly couldn't pull off a win like this in the primaries, but I just think it's reaching its end point here. So having processed this debate, how do you see this field going forward? I've been thinking about this, Eric, and I just think, Bloomberg's came down a little bit. If we look at the betting odds, he's come down a little bit. But I just don't know that the race was fundamentally changed by that debate when a lot of the headline stuff was. I think a lot of the headline was intentionally negative. One, Bloomberg's not a real Democrat. He's an independent. Mm-hmm. And I heard him in an earlier interview very well articulating the 12th Amendment, which is the Electoral College, and why it makes independent runs impossible, because you need a majority of electors or it goes to the House. You can't be the best of 3. You have to be better than both the Democratic and Republican nominee combined, or it goes to the House who selects one of their own. And he's just saying it's just not practical to do an independent run. Republican nomination is secured by Trump. The only way I could run is in a Democratic primary. So he gets it. He's in the Democratic primary because that's the only option here to really have a chance at the presidency. He's naturally an independent, and that's going to be a challenge for him going forward, is to become the nominee of the Democratic Party, given the fact that he's actually an independent.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think that's the strategy from the beginning was what was a clear path to the White House, and of course having an open primary process with multiple candidates. I mean, it would have been interesting if he would have entered in the Republican Party and challenged Trump for the nomination, but that may not have been certainly a clear path in terms of an incumbent president. But to have the two of them at some point have to engage with each other, and that may still happen. But I think what we're seeing as the outcome of this, and at least some of the looking at some of the polling data, is that Sanders continues to benefit. He continues to gain some ground. It's not significant, as we talked about. He's got a strong base of support, but because of this attack on the other candidates and Bloomberg and whether he's pulling from Biden and so on, and so you see a grouping of all of these other candidates with Klobuchar basically in the bottom, Biden still holding his own a little bit, though he's dropped considerably nationally at the top, but everybody else in between. And so it's almost casting this going into these next two primaries and into Super Tuesday as Sanders versus everybody else. How much of the primary vote will other candidates receive over against Sanders? And so we still a forecast for a brokered convention is still, the way that the mix is. So now all the debate is
some people are joining me on that.
Yeah,
right?
well, but the question is coming out because there's a lot of questioning going on the news cycle and on some of the radio broadcasts or programs that I listen to, and the question is asking people if Sanders goes into the convention with the largest number, not the majority, but the largest number, should he be given the nomination? And you're getting people saying basically
that
the way
part of the debate,
they ask in the debate, and that I think is where the challenge is now. But what impact will that have on the forthcoming primaries? Will people be thinking about it in that way, and then meaning, okay, well, either one response is Sanders is in the lead, so vote for Sanders. Then we don't have to worry about a brokered convention and who may end up with the nomination, or not vote at all. I mean, I think one of the things that we need to be watching into Super Tuesday is actual turnout, and to see if this confusion and these challenges that are going on amongst the candidates and this separation that Sanders is gaining actually has an impact on people turning out and voting in the primaries.
Yeah, and I think my main point there by saying Bloomberg's really an independent, that's one reason he's getting attacked. But also I think that's part of the reason the media was so happy to just attack his performance, give him an F when they should have given him a C. Is that, Democratic Party has a lot of control or influence on some media. And it was also interesting to see the Republican media, the media that prefers Trump, also went straight after, that was the worst debate performance ever in history, because he's challenging both the Democratic Party here, coming in as an independent, trying to get the opportunity to challenge Trump. There's no natural cheerleaders in there, but fundamentally it wasn't a great night for him. He's probably come down a little bit, but there's still a void in this field. The whole reason he entered late in the first place is you have Sanders with a nice momentum, but a horrible matchup against the president, and no one else has been able to fill that role of a great option here. Bloomberg brings these resources. He has a very credible resume. He brings these resources, and I still think he has that strength going forward. He is outspending everyone in history, and particularly these other candidates. They get money from, campaign donors, and that lets them go another week, and that lets them focus on the next thing in the process, and that lets them go from state to state. Bloomberg's spending money in every Super Tuesday state, records amount. He's even spending money in April states. I heard he already broke the record in Pennsylvania, which is an April state. I mean, he is just able to do this great media buy with rather effective commercials, selling a rather impressive resume, and the other ones don't bring the resources. He brings the resources to try to fill a void. Biden has the resume, but he's not inspiring the confidence. He sticks around. Buttigieg, best debater on the stage, but lacks the resume and experience to really make a final sale with it. Klobuchar is probably the best positioned in terms of being potentially a unifier for this party, but she doesn't have the momentum or the attention. She's like a lot of people's, second option, not their first option. Sanders has this great socialist movement that's very impressive in young people, but it is just a horrible matchup, and it's fundamentally big things that might be dangerous that people will pause before they want to buy into. And Warren is the best studied. She's the professor on the stage. She's studied. She's ready to go, but is she someone that can unify this party? I'm not sure. I just don't know that the dynamics change. We still have this really divided field where everyone has a strength, but no one is the obvious choice.
Right. And I think that's why we need to be watching going into Super Tuesday to see not only, like I said, turnout, but does that change any at all as well? I mean, we're seeing in some ways this short term, and it could be very well short term, because we could see some changes in between Sanders and the rest of the pack. Bloomberg was on this trajectory going up that has leveled off a little bit in some ways, but I think that's the question going into this: is there going to be anybody else that's going to jump out of that pack, or is this going to be the norm going through primaries on into April and May?
Yeah, and actually this is going to be the closest turnaround in debates for the whole cycle. So they're going to have another one on Tuesday night. So the headline focus on this particular debate. We're going to have a new debate to analyze. The dynamics might be very different. We're also going to start to get just a ton of states coming through that definitely Bloomberg can compete in. Not sure if they're all going to make it to these other states. Very interesting. And your focus on Super Tuesday is a natural, great segue to our second segment after the break, which will be on Texas, one of these Super Tuesday states. Stay tuned for more Cogley and Morrow on politics following the break.
Looking for a fun, casual podcast? Well, listen to Cruising the Planet. Conversations between a rotating crew of broke college students just trying to get through the semester. Listen in live every Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. Central on the Tarleton Radio YouTube channel, or listen to the episode afterwards wherever you get your podcasts. Just search Cruising the Planet.
Welcome back to Cogley and Morrow on politics. So we were talking about Super Tuesday is going to be big, bunch of states coming up. And we are, of course, in the great state of Texas. Eric, you are the native Texan in the room. You know it much better than me. I don't compete with you on Texas at all. How's Texas looking? It's a big state. It's an important state. How's it looking when we look at this field specifically to the Texas contest coming up?
So it's a field that has really changed over the last several months when you're looking at the national polling compared to looking at Super Tuesday primary states, and then of course looking to Texas, which is going through a political change in and of itself. I mean, this the gains that the Democratic Party has made in the congressional delegation. So these primaries are always an opportunity to look at turnout and to look at where the direction of that is going. And we've gotten into that on other shows where we talked about party change in Texas and what's happening. But really in the primary, what we've seen over a short period of time is Biden really lose a significant amount of ground and other candidates gain. And some of that, whether it's gone to Sanders or I think most of it, as we've identified, has gone to Bloomberg, it's really changed kind of the look going into Super Tuesday. And I think after this next week's debate, I'm not sure the significance of the debate in Nevada on Texas primary voters for the Democratic primary, but this next debate will be a week out from that vote. Early voting has already begun in the state. The thing that is a prize for Texas, and that's why it is so significant, and this is why Bloomberg early on ads, just going for the last several months, is because Texas awards 228 specific delegates that are identified by candidate, and then another 34 undesignated. So 228 pledged candidates, and then another 34 that are unpledged candidate or delegates to the primary, to the convention.
If I could just add, these are the nuances that are going to be incredibly important if we're headed to a brokered convention. Which delegate is pledged versus unpledged on that first ballot?
So and what's the significance of that is sometimes not so much on it starts with the first ballot, but if this moves to a second ballot and delegations start to then shift, because this is what you see within those delegations, which maybe remind us a little bit of the caucus process but it's where those delegates then can switch their pledge on that second ballot. And so that's what's significant with a large state like Texas, is because if there's unanimity among a delegation after the first ballot, or if they can gain that, then that usually can put the effort behind a specific candidate and help to sway not just more states, but also the outcome, given the large number of delegates. So Texas is very, very significant in this, and part of it is alongside with a California and a New York, but California and New York, a little more predictable in the past. Maybe it's going to be a little challenging if we have the mix that we do going further into the primary and we don't see some of these candidates drop off. But Texas is one of those that's really in play, and we've seen that in the numbers. We've seen just within the last 3 weeks, Biden drop into second place in the state, where going into this next week and leading up to the primary, Sanders has gained a little bit, but really not that much. And so he's in the lead in the state among, at least in terms of the percentage of people that are identifying and will vote for Sanders.
So I want to ask you about Sanders, because this Texas went for Hillary Clinton last cycle. It was not a Sanders state. Certainly Sanders is consolidating the left, but does he have like a limit to what he's capable of here in Texas?
It is, and that is, even with his lead, it only amounts to about 26% of those pledged delegates. So that tells you that's not a significant enough challenge to overcome in the long term leading to the convention.
It seems like Sanders' only chance to come out on the top in Texas is if the rest stay so divided. He may have this kind of ceiling of 26, and is 26 a plurality or not? I'm curious. It seems like Bloomberg is a good match for Texas for two reasons. The population of Texas, second largest state in the union, means those ads are the way to get out. You're just not going to go to every small town and diner and meet everyone. You got to get massive ad buys. He's been doing that already. He doesn't need to raise cash for Texas. He's already been spending in Texas rather effectively. And the other thing is Texas is open primary. So people who are independents or even Republicans can participate, where Bloomberg, as an independent himself, is going to do well in open primary states.
And you would think that. And I had thought that as well going into these last few weeks, that Bloomberg would, and he's made some ground. He's come from nothing, 0 to really he's at 10%. That could increase some more by Super Tuesday, but that puts him easily in fourth behind Sanders, Biden, and even Warren in Texas. And so what maybe start to be concerned about this a little bit in terms of the impact of Bloomberg and looking at this and what his chances may be was the recent University of Texas Tribune poll that just had come out this week that ranked. And so here you have Bloomberg in fourth place, but he's been coming up fast and maybe even with Biden by Super Tuesday if he continues on this trajectory.
And the commercials will continue, so this progress will keep going.
Right, but they also ask a question, not just on who would vote if the primary was held today, but there was a second question that said, of the remaining possible candidates, who would be your second choice, or have you not thought about it enough to have an opinion? And it was very interesting that 23% of the respondents said Elizabeth Warren, and 16% said Bernie Sanders. And so what made me look at this a little bit was the impact of Bloomberg overall. And not that he's showing where he is in the overall state polling in terms of the top 3 or 4 candidates, but as a second choice, where are respondents leaning? And so that makes me a little bit concerned that the impact, he's not getting the impact that he wanted in Texas, that the strategy that he has, it's had some effect, but at least in terms of polling at the moment, it's not having the impact that could propel him where he'd want to end up would be like in the top 1 or 2.
The second choice question is a very good one because the field narrows and consolidates and people sometimes end up on their second, third choice. This just doesn't concern me too much to see Elizabeth Warren number 1 as the second choice because that's a lot of Sanders people saying, well, second choice would be Warren, but Sanders ain't dropping out. Right, He's got the money, the movement. So the fact that Warren is this hypothetical second choice that those people will never have to go to doesn't concern me. It looks like Bloomberg's coming up 4th here, not the worst position.
Right, it is. I mean, what it shows, if you look at it in terms of delegates, he's right now on track to get about 50 delegates. Sanders at about 80 of the pledged delegates for the state. So that's certainly significant because that's even with Biden in the primary. We've been concerned about where Biden may end up after South Carolina if he falters. Would his campaign continue? If that happens, will that support switch to a Bloomberg behind a Sanders and a Warren in a state like Texas? Well, all of a sudden, if you combine Biden and Bloomberg, you have 100 delegates, and so a lot of this is very much in play. It's so very close, and it's all going to depend on how many of these candidates are still in the race come Super Tuesday.
I do think Texas is a race between Sanders with nice, solid, loyal support and Bloomberg. Can he catch up through these ads in big open primary state like Texas? I want to ask you a question about Pete Buttigieg, who's had a great campaign. He's on the map. He's got a thing. He's going to come here. Eric, I just think his opportunities in a state like Texas, which is socially pretty conservative, is limited. And I'm going to talk about a topic no one wants to talk about. Pete Buttigieg is openly gay with a husband. People have talked about his numbers aren't as well in African-American communities where that's their sentiment is a little more conservative in that community. And sentiment is a little more conservative in Texas, in these rural communities. I'm not saying whether or not this should affect anyone's vote. I'm saying it just might when Buttigieg tries to go to the South and the Midwest and say, hey, vote for me for president. Is his biographical fact that he's openly gay with a husband, is this a limitation on other parts of the USA just building this coalition?
I think it is. I think that's why his campaign was focused early on in making, being successful in Iowa and New Hampshire, knowing that, okay, if he can build on that success, that might roll into some of these other states, especially in the South, that, okay, people see him, they see what he can do, how he can speak. He's won a few primaries or been in the top 2. I'm not sure how that's going to work in terms of a strategy. It seems like, at least in terms of polling, that he is very far in the back, that he's just above Klobuchar, who's not even registering in some southern states in terms of any kind of percentage of vote. Sure. And so I think this is going to be very much a challenge for his campaign, especially you put the amount of money that Bloomberg is spending, you put the residual of what Biden still has. the strength of the supporters of a Bernie Sanders or an Elizabeth Warren, and that combined with these issues where he's moving into a part of the country that is more socially conservative, and this is going to be a factor, and that's just too much to overcome.
And it's interesting doing radio. I mean, no one even wants to bring it up. They talk about, well, he's a mayor. He's a mayor. But there's another thing, and he's impressive in some ways. He's so clever and witty on that debate stage. So Amy Klobuchar being limited, she's from Minnesota. I would just say Minnesota's also a Super Tuesday state, so she'll have something to celebrate on Super Tuesday. So anyway, Eric, as we're headed into this situation going forward, what are some final thoughts you have on the race in Texas and beyond?
Well, I think we're going to all be anxiously watching, or at least we will, because we're really into politics. Otherwise, we wouldn't do a show every week. But we're going to be looking at that debate. How will the tone change this next week, and where will the focus be? Is it going to shift to Sanders? I would see somebody like Biden still going after Bloomberg because that's the segment of vote that he needs. Will Warren and Sanders, because you remember Warren is maybe facing a last stand here if she doesn't have some success in the next couple of primaries into Super Tuesday. So I think that the next debate, I think that's critical. And then the next part of it is just the ramp up to Super Tuesday and what the impact is going to be, because in one day, the dynamics of this race can change dramatically. Depending on how all of these, because we could really say this is a national primary. It's enough states across the country that give us sampling with enough demographic groups to show the possibilities that each candidate will have.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to seeing if Biden survives. I've never been big on this campaign, and I think at some point he's going to have to pull out. And his last gasp here for success is South Carolina. He still thinks he can do well. But boy, if he loses that, that's embarrassing for him. He may not even want to go in there and lose it. And then that's a lot of poll numbers that freed up, and to see where they go. Like you're talking, the second choice, those Biden supporters who are important supporters because that's the establishment candidate. Mm-hmm. That's where a lot of the connections and money started. And who's the second choice for that, the inevitable person who didn't come through? Where does that go? That's going to be very interesting to watch and very important, I think.
Yes, it will be, and so we'll encourage everyone to engage with that, to watch that debate, to vote, either early voting or on Super Tuesday here in Texas, and to listen to us each week here on Cogley and Morrow on politics to get analysis as we navigate this primary process.
All right, and we got our past episodes up, podcasts throughout. We have our Facebook page. Come and like us. Thanks so much for listening to us this week on Cogley and Morrow on Politics. We'll be back next week with a fresh episode here on 90.5 KTRL.
This has been a Tarleton Radio Network podcast with production from AJ Heyer and Taylor Welch. Find more great shows by searching Tarleton Radio Network wherever you get your podcasts.